The Wire's characters, for the most part, can best be described as morally grey. There's no one character who's purely good or entirely evil. Rather, they're more moulded by their environment, or in the case of The Wire, slowly dehumanised by the institutions they sought to represent. A character like Chris Partlow isn't just born evil, rather he's become such over time, whether that be due to a traumatic event he once had to endure, or because the institution he belongs to has gradually shaped him into the man we all meet in Season 3. Now granted, some characters are definitely evil, or at least lean more toward moral darkness than they do ambiguity, and such characters are who I want to analyse in today's video. I want to find something good in every seemingly evil character, and I also want to try and make a case as to why they are the way they are. Maybe even justify their being, or at least understand it.
Let them know Marlo stepped to any motherfucker, Omar, Barksdale, whoever. My name is my name.
Marlo Stanfield is without question The Wire's most heinous character. He orders the hit of an entire family, including the children, all because he got word that somebody they were related to might have called him a name. He steals right in front of a security guard for no other reason than to humiliate the man, whom he then kills because the man pressed him for stealing, essentially saying that Marlo baited a man into taking action, and then killed him for doing exactly what he wanted him to do. He also orders a hit of an innocent delivery lady, just to ensure that Omar isn't going to be able to make bail, when he sets him up for the robbery of Andre's store. Without question, Marlo Stanfield is evil. However, a few moments do exist in the show, where Marlo shows us a tiny flicker of light in his otherwise pitch-black soul. There's a time where he handed out money to the corner kids so that they could buy new clothes for school. However, he only did such to both make an ally out of them, and have his name ring out, so good deed, not so good intention. He hired a disabled kid to look after his pigeons for him, even complimenting the kid on the good job he was doing. And he looked mildly happy when watching Chris Partlow hang out with his people, even vowing to take care of them whilst Chris spends his life in jail. But ultimately, the majority of good that Marlo does also serves to aid him in his pursuit of power, essentially saying that the only reason he partakes in these good deeds, assuming you can even call them that, is because in some way it serves to benefit him.
Your name gonna ring out, man.
Now, to try and understand how a person like Marlo Stanfield can come to be, we can actually take a look at a character who most Wire fans probably won't even remember, that being the little boy who was hiding in the closet during the hit on Junebug in the show's final season. You see, this boy had to witness arguably the most traumatic event a person could ever lay eyes on, that being the murder of his entire family. And we can see no more than an episode later that the event has completely wiped all emotion from the boy. He's now just empty. His family was also killed because of a slight to somebody's name, and upon learning this information, I deem it likely the boy will hold his own name in the highest of regard. But ultimately, this boy had grown up in the most decrepit conditions imaginable. His experience with the game has been nothing short of inhumane, and so by his standards that's how it's played, and that's how he's gonna play it. If you haven't yet figured it out, I believe this boy was once Marlo Stanfield, or at least serves to be an insight into how somebody like Marlo can come to be.
But there ain't nothing you fear more than a bad headline, is there? You'd rather live in shit than let the world see you work a shovel.
Irvin Burrell is a very morally complex character, and the Wire community's perception of Irvin only makes his character that much more complicated. There are those who can sympathise with the Commissioner, and there are those who think that he's nothing more than a villainous piece of shit. Me personally, I think all his actions are self-serving, and his only desire is to keep his arse in the Commissioner's chair. He'll derail a case and let the people responsible for dropping an officer remain free so long as it keeps him in the chair. He'll threaten everybody he can, in an attempt to try and remain in the chair, even when he knows that the person replacing him would be better for both the department and the city as a whole. He also has the audacity to complain about how difficult it is to sit in the chair, yet for whatever reason does everything he can to try and spend as much time as possible in it, despite knowing that.
You ain't shit when it come to policing.
Now, as far as good goes when it comes to Irving Burrell, he consoles Kima's girlfriend after Kima gets shot in season 1. However, he does originally try to have somebody else go talk to her, and only goes over himself once he's told no. Irving, for a brief period, seems genuinely concerned with how the investigation into Marlo Stanfield's crew is going. One might also argue that some of Burrell's actions, such as wanting to shut the Barksdale case down early, isn't solely driven by his selfish desire to remain in the chair, but rather to protect the department's political standing and avoid a public scandal, seeing as though it were now corrupt politicians the Major Crimes Unit were going after. However, to call such a good deed would be stretching. Regardless, there truthfully isn't much good that Irving does throughout the show, and the minor good that he does is cancelled out due to the selfish intentions behind it. Kenard, similar to Burrell, is a very complicated character in terms of where he sits on the moral scale, as how much can you truly blame a 10-year-old child for? And what makes analysing Kenard's morality even more challenging is that, unlike Michael or Randy, who were clearly shaped by the trauma and pressures of their environment, Kenard always gave off this chilling impression that he was always going to be this little psychopath, regardless of who or what he was surrounded by. One might even go as far as to say that he's lucky to be born into a city where his sadistic behaviour is actually rewarded, and therefore will only ever get worse due to no fault of his own. However, for the sake of this video, we're going to label Kenard as evil.
Go on, man.
Where the package at, man?
Package up my ass, Gump.
Y'all about to.
You're about to. Go on, walk, Gump ass motherfucker.
Now, as far as Kenard's evil deeds go, he's seen dousing a stray cat in lighter fluid for seemingly no other reason than to see what would happen if he set the cat on fire. He robs his friend's stash and then calls him a gump-ass motherfucker once confronted about it. He goes out of his way to humiliate Dookie on the corner and make his life impossible. And he kills Omar Little simply because he was curious to see what would happen if he shot somebody he probably thought invincible in the back of the head. Now, as far as Kenard's good deeds go, he seemed genuinely terrified once realising that he had actually killed a person, dare I say Kenard's only humanising moment on the show, and he attempts to shield his friend Donut from Officer Walker, before realising his attempts are futile and making a run for it. But other than that, there is ultimately no good within the likes of Kenard, and if we were to analyse every single character on The Wire, and were to try and decipher who was the most evil, based not on what they do but why they do it, Kenard would shockingly rank as one of, if not the most evil character on the show. Assuming of course you can look beyond the fact that he's only 10.
Well, you best watch your ass, because the slingers out here, they like to crack babies.
Chris Partlow and Snoop Pearson. I was originally under the impression that, whilst undeniably evil, their morality was largely shaped by the individual telling them what to do. Essentially saying that I didn't hold them as accountable for their evil deeds as I did Marlo. Chris and Snoop were merely enforcing the evil, whereas Marlo was the one authoring it. However, upon rewatching the show, I learnt that there was never a moment where either of the two had any moral objection to an order, and the few times they didn't agree with Marlo was only due to practicality rather than morality. They even advocate to commit such evil numerous times throughout the show. Take for example the time where Snoop begs Marlo to let her go back out onto the street and continue killing, or the time where Chris got all excited because Marlo told him that he could murder an innocent taxpayer. Without question, Chris and Snoop were just as evil as the man who told them who to do. Now, as far as good goes when it comes to Chris Partlow and Snoop Pearson, There was Chris Partlow taking a genuine interest in Michael Lee, and actually seeming to care for him. Take for example the time he told Marlo that Michael's first kill couldn't be somebody he knew. Or the time where he let his emotions get the better of him when dealing with Michael's stepdad. One of few times where Partlow came across as more human than machine. Snoop's reaction to the butchering was also one of few humanising moments for her character as well, as she seemed genuinely horrified when Chris just lost it. Chris Partlow's motivations were supposedly not so evil, as it seemed as though he were a part of the game largely to provide for his family. Snoop Pearson tipped the worker at Hardware Barn over $100 for educating her on the nail gun. She even goes on to praise the man for the good job he's done.
Man, you go ahead and handle that for me, man. And keep the rest for your time.
This is $800.
So what, man? You earned that bump like a motherfucker, man. Keep that shit.
Now, to try and understand how characters like Chris Partlow and Snoop Pearson can come to be, I first highly recommend watching my prior videos on the two, for a full and just breakdown. Links I'll leave down in the description. But the most crucial thing we need to understand about the two is why are they so obedient to Marlo, and why is it so easy for them to give their lives to this monster? In the case of Snoop Pearson, she's so obedient because Marlo gives her life meaning, and in a twisted sense he's also one of few people who actually seem to somewhat care for her, and such is why Snoop is so loyal. Chris is somewhat similar, and I'm a firm believer that Chris was in some way a military man before he joined with Marlo, and upon leaving the military, Chris, like many others, lacked direction, and when the likes of Marlo, potentially a childhood friend, were able to give him that, Chris Partlow was grateful. Marlo also provides the two with the opportunity to release some of that pent-up anger they're so obviously consumed by. Chris from his sexually abusive childhood, and Snoop from both her shitty upbringing and time in jail.
I didn't care about nothing. Like, absolutely nothing. I didn't care that if I die, I didn't care. I mean, why care if your mother and father don't care nothing about you?
He was angry.
Yeah, angry. Angry at the world. Angry at myself.
Officer Walker is undoubtedly the most morally reprehensible officer on the show. He snaps Donut's fingers because Donut stole a car and ran him all over town, even threatening to kill Donut if he ever catches him doing it again. He robs Omar's ring because why not? He humiliates Randy and robs him of his $200 because once again, why not? He also robs Bubbles' depot after being asked to help Bubbles out because another person literally just robbed him, only adding to Bubbles' humiliation. Case in point,
Walker be evil.
Walker be evil, yo.
Walker's an asshole.
Yeah, man, Officer Walker be shady like that. I mean, Officer Walker's a shady motherfucker.
Now, as far as good goes when it comes to Officer Walker, one might argue that he saved Omar's life in Season 4 by giving McNulty the go-ahead to allow Omar to make a phone call before he goes to jail. However, I would argue that Walker only did this so to not make an enemy out of McNulty. He apologises to the lady whose car he hit during the donut pursuit. However, he only did such once a woman threatened to report him. But other than that, there isn't much good within Officer Walker. Now, to try and wrap our head around how a person like Officer Walker can come to be, similar to Marlo, we can actually take a look at another character on the show, that being the CO Avon Barksdale set up with the hotshots in Season 2. You see, Officer Tillman lost his cousin at the hands of the game, and I get the impression that such is what motivated him to become an officer. He simply wanted power, so that he could screw with those similar to the people who made his life miserable. And Officer Walker, I believe, is somewhat similar. In some way, his life prior to being an officer was probably hell due to the game and those who play it, and so he decided to become a police officer so that he could abuse those who, similar to Tillman, made his life a living hell. Or perhaps he just serves to be the embodiment of all things wrong with the so-called Western District way of policing. He and Colicchio are what come when you bring officers up through a system which convinces its people that they're fighting a war rather than policing a city.
I mean, you call summer war. And pretty soon, everybody gonna be running around acting like warriors. They gonna be running around on a damn crusade, storming corners, slapping on cuffs, racking up body counts. And when you at war, you need a fucking enemy. And pretty soon, damn near everybody on every corner is your fucking enemy. And soon the neighborhood that you're supposed to be policing, that's just occupied territory.
Clay Davis can best be described as a double dealer. As Stringer puts it, he's somebody who will have one hand in your pocket, whilst the other hand stroking his wiener. He'll rob millions from the community, but give a small portion back to the people, just so that when the time comes he'll fight for Clay to remain in power, all because he's this generous man who one time paid somebody's rent, completely unaware that he's the reason your bills are skyrocketing, on top of the fact that he's also working alongside and stealing money from the drug dealers responsible for destroying the community he's supposed to be helping. He'll tell the commissioner he's looking out for him, and then whilst in the very same building call the mayor and advise him on to how best go about firing the commissioner. Without question, Clay Davis is one slimy individual.
Paid $20,000 for this shit?
He probably went to Royce and shook him down for another 30.
Motherfucker. Clay Davis must know something we don't.
He knows just enough to get paid twice.
Now, as far as good goes when it comes to Clay, he's of course incredibly charming, and actually seems to be a rather pleasant individual when speaking to anybody outside of his circle. He does, whilst despite it being for the wrong reasons, give a fair portion of money to those who need it. And one could argue that if ranked by actual dollar amount donated to the people of Baltimore, he's probably one of the more generous politicians in the city. He also gives Damien Price a job as his driver, despite Damien's criminal history. But other than that, there is no real good when it comes to Senator Clay. Sure, he isn't as outright malevolent as the likes of a Marlo or an Officer Walker, but at least with them you know what you're in for. Clay Davis, on the other hand, you just want to hope it's only your money he's after.
Jesus Christ.
He's slick. Apologizes for the short con, and in the next breath setting us up for the law.
Delonda Bryce and by extension Brianna Barksdale, seen as though they're both practically one in the same, stand out as two of the most evil mothers on the wire. Brianna convinces her son to take 20 years in jail, just so a steady income of drug money can remain. Delonda belittles Colvin after saving her son from a night in jail. She also refuses to give Naaman to Colvin, because such would mean saving her son from the game. They also both push their sons further and further into the game, despite knowing that they'll most likely end up dead or in jail. Delonda is also seemingly attracted to a bunch of 8th graders who also happen to be the friends of her own son. Without question, Delonda and Brianna are both evil. Now, as far as good goes when it comes to these two, Brianna does at times seem to genuinely want what's best for her son, at least within the context of The Wire. She gets angry at Avon for sending him to New York on his own, and unlike Delonda, doesn't want her son to go to jail. However, once he's there, she basically just says screw it, suffer so that I can carry on making a living off of Avon and Stringer. Although disgusted, Delonda does eventually give up her son, and allow him to be saved by Colvin. She also does provide Naaman with a lot of material support, and because of such he does have a much easier life than the rest of his friends on the corner. Brianna is genuinely devastated after the death of D'Angelo, and even cuts ties with Avon as well as the money, all because she was skeptical regarding what truly happened to her son. Delonda, albeit a twisted sense of loyalty, does remain loyal to Weebay, even after she isn't able to make any more money off of his loyalty to the Barksdale organisation. But in my eyes, such is just the bare minimum, and to call any of these deeds good would be stretching. It's more like the few times they do what is expected of them as a parent. Now, to try and understand how mothers like these two can come to be, we first need to take into account the fact that they're both women trying to harden men. Ultimately, they both have little to no idea what it is they're doing. And such isn't necessarily the fault of their own, more so it's the fault of spoiled parenting. You see, one of the major issues is that not only do they not know what they're doing, but they also fail to realise that just because their son's father or uncle was a hard man, doesn't mean that they will be. It's actually quite the opposite, as where Bay and Avon grew up with truly no other choice but to play the game, Dee and Damon grew up reaping the rewards of their hard labour. To them, the game is now just a venture. Their survival, like it did their father and uncles, doesn't depend on it. And to try force such survival instincts onto them, after years of giving them everything they could ever want, and for ultimately the benefit of nobody but you, it's disaster waiting to happen.
I can't go home. She expect me to be my father, but I ain't him.
Now that isn't to say that Delonda and Brianna don't want what is best for their children. Rather, they just have a warped view of what best looks like. To them, the game has given them everything. However, they fail to realise that for their husband and son, the game will eventually take away everything.